Stories they told me. The Missionaries of Charity, The Bronx Shelter and Soup Kitchen, Queen of Peace, Winter 1981, by Lars Cederholm. In the winter of 1981-82, I worked off and on as a volunteer in the soup kitchen and spent periodic overnights in the shelter under the care of the Missionaries of Charity. My friend, the filmmaker Ann Petrie, who later made a documentary about Mother Teresa, introduced me to the sisters and once to the Mother Teresa herself. Some 30 years later, I found my notebook from these times. Each one of the 5 stories is essentially true and recollected from sketchy notes and later embellished on the loom of my imagination. Now let's listen to the story about Joseph, who rings the door to the shelter one bitter cold February evening. He was dressed in a thread-worn, oversized black coat. His bobby hair was standing straight up, his eyes wide open, radiating fear and confusion. His face was covered with patches of hair. His skin had a strange grey tone. "Vous parlez français?" he asked. "Bien sûr. Please come in and get warm. This is a nasty day for us humans to be outside. You know, it's minus 15 degrees Celsius and a sharp wind to sting you. Let me get you a blanket and make you a cup of hot tea. Would you like something to eat? Sorry to have to tell you this, but you don't look so good at the moment." Tears came to his eyes. He told me that the moment was so overwhelming that he could do nothing but to cry, not in sadness but in gratitude. "Monsieur," he sobbed, "I feel that I just came back from the dead. This morning I was convinced that this would be the last day of my life. To have the good fortune to find this place has saved me, and you speak French, a sign from higher up. Let me show you your bed and a shower. When you're ready, I'll have a cup of tea and a sandwich for you. Tomorrow in the morning, a few of us will get together to talk over a cup of coffee, and perhaps you can join us then. Just for you to know, this house is in the care of the Missionaries of Charity. The spiritual leader of this organization is Mother Teresa, who you may have heard of. You will have a bed and food, and we will do our best to get you some clothing that will protect you from the winter. No drugs or alcohol, these are the rules here. I'm here one night a week to help out wherever possible. Nobody comes here without a story, and perhaps some of us would like to share what brings us to the shelter. I will help you with the language as much as possible. I already know that a few other people will join us. We'll find out tomorrow. Have a good night's rest, Joseph." The following day, 8 a.m. The room is simple and radiates the purpose of the mission. The floor is covered with linoleum, a large table and some plastic chairs, a flowering plant in the window, on the walls, a picture of the Virgin Mary and Jesus on the cross. In the corner, on a pedestal, stands a carved statue of a saint with folded hands. Sitting silently around the table are Joseph, Carlos, Kevin, Sergei, David, and Lars. Joseph. His kind eyes are moving slowly from person to person. A few pieces of blood-stained paper stick to his clean-shaven cheeks. He's covered himself with a blue blanket, accentuating his air of dignity. He speaks French, moving his hands to illustrate every sentence. Lars is translating. "I came from Kinshasa in Zaire to this country a week ago. I'm here because my life was in danger if I'd stayed in Zaire. By profession, I'm an avionics technician. I was part of the technical staff responsible to prepare President Mobutu's aircraft to take him and his entourage of women and his many children on an excursion. When my job was done, I left the airport and went home to my parents' house. I was satisfied that everything with the aircraft was in good order. As I was getting ready to go to bed, I received a phone call from my cousin who had a job at the airport. He told me that one of the engines had exploded just as the aircraft was ready to take off, and a disaster was averted in the last second. My cousin, who was a witness to the accident, said that Mobutu's family was safely evacuated from the plane. The president was in shock and convinced that he and his family was the target of sabotage and an attempt on his life. Someone was scheming to kill him, and he gave orders to go and find those of us who had prepared the plane for the flight. My cousin told me to go into hiding right away since members of the Mobutu secret police was on the way to my home. He gave me the address to a safe place where I could hide and urged me to leave my home without delay. Everybody in Zaire knows what would happen to me if these people found me. I would be taken to an underground cell at Camp Kongolo and tortured to death. My cousin didn't have to tell me. It took me a few minutes to tell my parents about the situation, and we gathered a few things together in a backpack. We had $50 at home, which my parents gave to me, and I jumped into my car and left my hideaway. I was careful to park the car away from the hiding place, and then I walked there under the cover of the night. I stayed low for a week without any visits, careful not to reveal where I was hiding. I received a message that my friends were preparing to get a plane ticket, a passport under a new name, and a student visa to America. For some reason, my cousin, who made all these arrangements, had contacts in the American embassy, and he managed to convince someone there that I had nothing to do with the accident and that my life was in danger. To prepare for my escape, I dressed in a way that would make it hard to recognize me. A beard, glasses, and a beret made me look different from myself. When I checked in at the airport, 2 of Mobutu's goons were standing at the counter looking carefully at every passenger, sometimes even checking their papers. One of them stopped me and asked me for the purpose of my trip. I told him that I was a student and I was going to the U.S. for my continued studies and that I was coming back home soon to serve my country. He didn't ask for my passport, and he didn't notice that I had no luggage other than my backpack. He even wished me a safe trip and gave me a pat on the back. During this brief moment, my heart was beating so hard that I was afraid that he could see it beat outside of my body. All I could imagine at that moment was me hanging upside down in some blood-drenched room, beaten to a pulp. It took hours of waiting to board the plane, and I made every effort to keep a low profile and stay in the background to avoid detection. Obviously, I got on the aircraft, and you can imagine the feeling when the plane finally took off and broke through the clouds. I had my life. When I arrived at Kennedy Airport via a stop in Brussels, I was interrogated for half a day by the immigration police, and I was treated like an enemy. They didn't want to believe my story. It just sounded made up and unreal, they said. It was a scary experience. These officers continued to speak to me in an aggressive tone, telling me that they would send me back to where I had come from. They seemed angry that I couldn't speak English very well. They were obviously irritated that they had to wait for a French-speaking interpreter who arrived after a few hours. The hostility of these immigration officers really surprised me. Maybe they just had something against me as a black person. How else can I explain this hostile treatment? I was finally allowed to leave without any further explanation. Once outside the terminal, I was met with bitter cold and snow. This was the first time in my life that I experienced snow and temperatures below zero, and I didn't like one bit of it. In fact, I was shocked and I felt that I could hardly breathe. I had no idea where to go other than to Manhattan, which was New York to me. My plan was to look for a cheap hotel and start thinking about what to do. I jumped into a taxi, which took me on a slippery drive to Manhattan. As we approached, I briefly saw the skyline in the snowstorm, the first thing in America that I recognized. The man in the taxi asked me where I wanted to go. Since I had no answer, he drove me to a big park full of snow. He took my $50 and left me in a hurry without a word. There I was, standing on the street, alone, penniless and terrified, in a park covered with snow and trees with no leaves. I could just as well have landed on the moon, and it would not have been a stranger experience. I started to look for someone who could speak French, which turned out to be impossible. I walked around to ask for help, but people pretended not to see me and walked away. I tried again and again to find someone to help me, but people avoided me. I was so frozen, I thought I would die. All I had was these pants and a pair of sneakers, a shirt, and a thin jacket. I noticed how people protected themselves from the cold with hats, thick coats, and big shoes. I was lucky to pick up a coat that someone had left near a garbage can. The hunger was terrible, worse than a snake bite. A restaurant gave me some leftovers after I made signs from my hand to my mouth. The kind man who gave me the food really saved me for a few days. Later, I had to find food in the garbage. I ate horrible things just to survive. I found a metal grid above some train running under the earth, where it was a little warmer. I made a bed from paper boxes and fell into the strangest dreams. I was so cold that I was afraid that I would never wake up again and that someone would find me dead. The next morning, after walking around for hours, I found a building with a hotel sign. I walked into the lobby and asked the man for a room. He did not even want to see my passport or anything. He just asked me to leave, and I understood that he was going to call the police. I found a mirror, and I could hardly recognize myself. I looked terrible. Back in the park, I knelt in front of a bench and prayed to the Lord to save my life. I have never prayed like that before. That evening, I went back to the metal grid above the train and woke up when an old man tried to pull the coat from my body while screaming at me. After a short struggle, he ran away and I still had the coat. Days passed like this, and I kept trying to find someone to speak to. Finally, I got in touch with a man who stopped and asked me where I was from. He knew a little French. I told him my story, and he gave me $20, and he wrote the address to this place on this piece of paper. He brought me to the train that goes under the earth, and he wrote me the name of the train stop where I had to get off. He also made this little map to help me to find this house. I have no possessions other than the backpack and the clothes I'm wearing. What you don't see, I keep up here in my head. My profession is technical, and anything with electricity would be where I can help. I'm ready to do anything you can think of, including cleaning latrines. This is a fight for my life, and there's no way for me to go back. Carlos. His elbows were resting on the table, his eyes darting back and forth to land on his twisting hands again and again. His hair slicked down, oily and carefully combed. He slowly rocked back and forth, looking up as if he was looking for words about himself. He tries to speak, but has to start again and again searching for words. He finally takes a hold of himself and begins to tell his story. For the first time, I will speak openly about the real reasons why I find myself here. Now I must force myself to remember the nightmare that I have been trying so hard to leave behind me. First, I'm sorry to say that I am an alcoholic. The bottle has won a big victory over me. I have convinced myself that I can only forget my pain if I'm drunk, and I drink until I pass out. I have now been in this house for a week, and the miracle is that I haven't had a drink during these days. That is why I have come to see that I must try to understand my misery and not try to drink myself away from it. Now I'm afraid that I have to leave this place. I know I must leave and go look for a new life, and I really don't know where and what to look for. When I was 24 years old, I was married to Carmen, a beautiful girl who was 18 years old at the time. We lived in a small town in Ecuador. My grandfather was an electrician, and I became a plumber. Carmen trained to become a teacher to small children. We were so much in love. We could not get enough of each other, and we suffered when we were away from each other, even if it was only for a day. For years we were trying to make a baby, and then one happy day, the miracle happened and Carmen was pregnant. After 5 years of the most wonderful life with Carmen, our prayers were heard and we had a small daughter. Her name was Maria, in honor of the Virgin who heard our prayers. Imagine our happiness. A few months after the birth, both Carmen and Maria were infected with some kind of unknown bacteria. The doctors couldn't stop the spreading of the bacteria no matter how hard they tried, and both Carmen and the baby died an agonizing death, as I was helplessly watching. The pain at that moment when they died was so terrible that I tried to throw myself out of a window. The doctors pulled me back and gave me some kind of injection that made me go to sleep. After this disaster, I felt like an animal that had been living free and suddenly found itself in a small, cold room with no escape. The empty space left inside of me was filled with pain that was both physical and mental. I could only breathe with great effort and felt that I was choking. It was impossible for me to stay in our home. Everything there just tortured me with the memories of Carmen and the baby. I moved in with my mother and one of my sisters, but that ended badly. Both of them became disgusted with me. I was in a constant drunken stupor, and we were fighting about everything. They finally chased me out of their home and told me never to come back. They even threw stones after me so that I wouldn't forget the message. I went back to our home and spent days passing out from drinking. Now I will try to tell you about something that I remember vaguely. I got hold of a shovel and somehow managed to walk all the way to the cemetery where Carmen and Maria had been buried several months earlier. I do remember digging because the evening was warm, and to dig all the way down to the coffin was hard work. I managed to pry open the lid, and then I don't remember anything until the next morning. When I opened my eyes, I was on my back looking up through a hole. Standing on top of the hole were people pushing and shoving each other to get a good look at me. Many of them had cameras, and the camera flashes almost blinded me. People were talking in shrill voices, screaming over each other, and a few men were leaning down into the hole and grabbed my pants and jacket and tried to pull me out. I remember resisting them, and some more people were leaning into the hole, pulling at me. When I came up from the hole, I had one of her arms with me. I was thrown at the side, and people were calling me bad things, and some were even spitting on me. Others were throwing things at me. A sharp stone hit me in my head, and I was bleeding badly. The police came and saved me from the crowd. At that moment, I really wanted to die. I was thrown in jail where I was waiting for weeks without knowing what was happening. The guards told me that I was not allowed to see any of the other inmates for safety reasons. They were afraid that somebody would try to harm me. At least that's what they said. Later I learned that photographs of me next to Carmen's dead body had been on the front page of many magazines and papers in Ecuador, and in some other countries as well. The picture of Carmen were gruesome. Some of the flesh on her face had fallen off the bone. Her long hair was attached to the skull on rotten meat. Her teeth were grinning. Later I learned that some people were making comments that she was laughing at the fool who went to sleep next to her in the grave. Horrible things like that. After some time, the disgust was replaced by people feeling sorry for me. A journalist with a great deal of influence in my country had been talking about me on a popular television program and explained that I deserved pity and not contempt. He had interviewed people who had known Carmen and me and had come to realize the extent of the tragedy. He managed to turn the opinion in my favor. The judge took pity on me, and I was released from jail. The story spread, and people who recognized me from the newspapers kept reminding me of what I had done. Many wanted to have their pictures taken next to me. After a few weeks, I was desperate to leave the community that was no longer mine. In fact, I was no longer part of anything there. I sold my few belongings, and with the little money there was left, I managed to get a tourist visa and booked a ticket to New York City to look for my father. My father left my mother and the family when I was just a small boy. The rumor was that he was living here in New York. For me, it was hard not to have a father, and I was always longing for him. It was kind of a secret that I wanted him to be my father. My family wanted me to be angry with him, but now I was thinking that if I could only find him, he would be happy to be my father. I had an old picture of him, not a good one, but that was my only hope to find him. I knew his name, but perhaps he had become a gringo and changed the name. The rumor was that he was a janitor in some elegant building in Manhattan. Once in New York, I figured out that if I lived on rice and beans every day, I could have enough money to stay for 1 month in a cheap boarding house in Lower Manhattan. I was never sober, not even for a minute. The cheapest liquor I could find was called Thunderbird, some kind of sweet alcohol that did the job. After the first week, the hotel had enough of me and asked me to leave. I lived on the streets begging for money. Some people told me that many of the alcoholic beggars were hanging out at the corner of Houston Street and the Bowery. I became a member of a community of homeless alcoholics. All day was spent drinking and begging. The younger men helped the older beggars to get up so they could get to the cars in time for the red light. It was hard to leave my friends on the corner, but one day I took charge of myself. I went to the Bowery Mission, where I had a shower, cut my hair, and put on some decent clothes that the mission gave me. It took me a few days to clean up. I took the subway to 57th Street and started to walk from door to door on all the avenues, showing each doorman the picture of my father, and gave them his name. Many of them were unfriendly to me. Finally, a man from Colombia thought he recognized him from the photo and gave me the address where he thought I could find him. For days I observed the building where my father was working. I could recognize him from the picture. It was him. There was no question about it. During these days I tried to drink less, and I was sober enough to walk straight. The building where he worked was on Fifth Avenue facing Central Park, which gave me a chance to observe him from a place behind a bush. Sometimes I walked right by the building to get a better look of him. He was dressed in a gray uniform with gold ribbons. On his head he was wearing a hat that had some kind of gold ornament in the front. He was opening doors, carrying groceries and parcels, saluting people, calling taxis, and he smiled a lot. Each time he did something for people, they gave him money, which he counted as soon as he was alone. He seemed to have a good relation with other doormen in the surrounding buildings. The men would get together on the sidewalk to smoke and talk. My father looked like a nice and cheerful person, and I was looking forward to become his son and friend. The mid-afternoon seemed to be the least busy time for him, and I took hold of myself and walked up to him one sunny day. When I greeted him in Spanish, his face became hard, and he asked me to leave the premises. "No panhandling in front of this building," he said. I wasn't prepared for this beginning, and I began to stammer that I was Carlos, his only son, who had come all the way from Ecuador to meet him. He was looking at me with the same hard face and said that I was drunk and confused. "I have no son in Ecuador, and I will have to ask you to leave right now." His voice was cold, and he almost shouted at me. His behavior was hard to understand, and I thought that I must provide some more facts for him to believe me. I insisted that my mother, Eulalia Guzman, was his wife at the time he left Ecuador 20 years ago. "She had 3 children with you before you left. I'm the oldest, and your other 2 children are females." He kept interrupting my story, but I just had to go on. I told him that I had sold all my belongings to come to New York to meet him. I started to sob and revealed to him how I had been missing him every day of my life as long as I could remember. I wanted to tell him about my hard life and how it was my hope that he would open his heart to me. I asked him for a helping hand until I was able to get back on my feet. Now his face became even harder, and he said that he had no idea who I was. He never had a son, and this was just a big mistake. He simply told me to leave right away and never come back. "If you do," he said, "I'll call the police, and you will be in more trouble than you can imagine." He turned his back to me and walked inside the lobby. I was stunned and stayed outside the building, hoping that he would come back and talk to me. Instead, 2 of his Latino friends from the next-door building appeared and asked me to leave the sidewalk unless I wanted to get into a lot of trouble, including to be sent back to Ecuador. They informed me that this man is not your father and that I should be ashamed to come to his door and make such ridiculous claims. I was crushed and felt like my last hope had just vanished. I had no other idea than to go back to my friends at the Bowery, and I kept drinking and begging for money at the stoplight. I'm not sure how long I lived like this. Everything around me became the same, and time vanished. Maybe I was in the corner for several months. I'm not sure. A few times I went to take a shower at the mission. Someone there gave me the address to this place. The man told me that I should not bother to go and seek help here if I was drunk. I started to admit to myself that I had fallen as low as anyone can fall, and I started to pray and ask the Lord to save me. I didn't want to die. This was new for me. I stopped drinking 3 days before coming here, and I went through hard times with my body shaking and twisting. Now I have been sober for weeks, and it seems like a miracle to me. I realize that I must find a way to create dignity to my life, so please help me to find a way. I'm feeling shame for the things I've done, and I realize that I must conduct myself in a way that honors the lives of Carmen and our baby. Kevin. Kevin is a poorly dressed, lanky white man in his early 30s with long, greasy hair and a ring in his right ear. He wears a black t-shirt and faded corduroy pants. His face is strained and unsmiling. His squinting gray eyes hard and fixed at the cup in front of him. He starts to speak with no movement of his body. I just listened to the end of what Joseph was telling us, and I understand that you are in trouble just like I am. Let me speak straight to you, Carlos. I was fighting back tears when I heard your story. So much of what you said reminds me of my own pain. You're giving me courage to tell my story. I have been living the last 8 years of my life with an overwhelming feeling of guilt that has taken me away from my family and friends, and here I am, homeless with little hope for me, because there is no room for anything but shame and guilt. I have things on my mind that will not leave me alone for a minute, no matter what distractions I seek. What I have done takes over and keeps me locked up in hopelessness. I'm angry that this country that I once thought was the best place on this earth has betrayed me and deprived me of a life worth living. I was born and raised in a small town in South Carolina. Life was good, at least I thought it was. In high school, many of the kids played football, and I made the school team. The reward was that we were popular with the girls. My folks were all Southern Baptists, so any kind of drug or alcohol was strictly forbidden in my family. I went through high school with good grades, and some of my teachers wanted me to go to college. The Vietnam War was raging, and I was rooting for Nixon, and I wanted my country to win. I didn't really know where Vietnam was on the map. I was 19, and I decided to join the army so I could help save my country from the communists who threatened the United States and the free world. Better dead than red was something I heard from pretty much everybody I knew. I enlisted in the army, and my family was proud that I was willing to be a warrior for the United States and Jesus and save my country from these godless people. After some training, we were packed into a huge aircraft and flew what seemed to be forever until we landed and refueled on an island called Guam and then on to Saigon. We stepped out of the aircraft right into the tropics. The heat was worse than I knew from South Carolina. The young men were dressed in full battle fatigues with backpacks and machine guns. It wasn't hard to see how stunned they all were. Nothing looked like what any of us knew from home. I remember being really scared. The officers who greeted us took control of us. They shouted at us over roaring fighter jets and helicopters. They let us know that we were going to become real men and learn how to fight these communist bastards who didn't have the guts to come out and fight. We had no idea what was going to happen next. After some rest, we were given some additional training in warfare in Vietnam. What we were told didn't comfort anybody. Special officers were teaching us to look for traps, some that decapitated people, and some that impaled the victims on sharp bamboo poles, left to die a horrendous death. We were instructed how to be vigilant when we moved around in the jungle. We heard about the kinds of torture that was waiting for us if we would let these bastards take us alive. Only the devil would think up stuff like that, and we were beginning to listen to the bullies who talked about how we should all look forward to killing the monkeys. It was as if they were preparing for some entertainment. These bullies took some kind of informal leadership over the rest of us when the officers were not around. I don't remember anybody thinking that our napalm, cluster bombs, and flamethrowers were the same thing. Truth be told, the only difference was that our stuff killed and maimed more people. Anyhow, we had nothing to do with the devastation that these weapons caused. Every day we could read statistics of how many Viet Cong and North Vietnamese soldiers had been killed. High figures were celebrated and helped us feel that we were winning the war. At the end of the first month in Vietnam, my company came under heavy enemy fire. For the first time, I saw boys dead and dying. During the whole battle, I was hiding under a bush. I was pushing my body to the ground as the bullets were making zipping sounds just above my head. I was pissing and shitting in my fatigues, and I could not bring myself to fire a single shot. After this first fight, the other privates in my platoon were beginning to call me names, and there was nobody I could complain to. I even had to sit and eat alone. I became some kind of an untouchable person. The second time we got involved in battle, things were different. I was fighting like a tiger under some kind of strange spell, and I even managed to rescue a wounded soldier who was screaming for help as he was lying in the open field. I crawled out to him and pulled him back to safety, even though I had been shot in the leg and had difficulty moving around. I did all this while firing rounds at the enemy who were hiding in the bushes. After that fight, nobody called me names. I was awarded the Medal of Honor, and I was interviewed and celebrated in many of the networks and newspapers as an American hero. I was told that my family had been celebrating back in South Carolina, and the whole town had a parade for me, even though I was back in Vietnam. After some time, I understood that my celebrity was used to serve various self-interests. Slowly, I started to acknowledge to myself how war-crazy and murderous our presence in Vietnam was. I tried my best to swallow the whole fucking propaganda that we were fed every day, but the absurdity of it all took over and sent me into serious doubt about being there at all. My company was under the command of a captain who we called Crazy Tim. Tim was a graduate from some Ivy League school back in the U.S. Personally, I think that he tried to prove something to himself because he never avoided seeking battle, and we started to think that he was going to get us all killed. Some black kids even started to talk about shooting Crazy Tim. Maybe he had a death wish. He didn't give a hoot about discipline in the company, and he looked away when soldiers were smoking weed and opium through the barrels of the guns. There was also plenty of speed to go around. When we were camping out in the jungle, there were times when the soldiers get so hopped up on all the drugs that they started to shout and scream as if they were on some insane high school party back in the States. When that happened, I volunteered the job as a sentinel, far away from these noisy affairs. I figured that I had a better chance to stay alive sitting quietly by myself in the jungle. The black and the white kids started to form separate gangs with their own rules, and there were times when things became pretty scary between the groups. We came very close to racial warfare right there in the jungle. The strange thing is that nobody was left with a choice, no matter what you were thinking. I had to join the white kids. The rules were so strong in each of the camps that there was no other way other than to follow and do what the group wanted. Each group was led by a scary bully and his friends who ruled over us. Crazy Tim did not interfere with all that, as long as we were fighting together when we encountered Viet Cong and when they came looking for us. I became like a dead person inside. I was afraid of dying an agonizing death, and yet somehow I started to give a hoot about whether I was living or dying. I became a mental zombie at the loss of knowing right from wrong. Later I have come to understand that I had no perspectives from where to judge this absurd situation. There were times when I thought about Jesus and the Almighty, but none of them were with us in Vietnam as far as I was concerned. The chaplain approached me to talk about my faith, but I tried to stay away from him. In a way, I was embarrassed to have abandoned my faith, and I was wondering what my family and parish would think of me now that I had expelled Jesus from my heart. Back home, I would be condemned to hell. It didn't matter. I was already there. Now I will tell you the story that I have never told anyone. I'm nervous as hell to say out loud what I have decided to tell you right now. I know that if some Vietnam vets hear what I have to say, some of them will come after me to shut me up. But I will tell you about the memories that haunt me day and night. We had been doing a cleaning up operation in the Mekong Delta and had received order to set up camp and wait for news from the intelligence unit where to go next. We were hiding out in the jungle and life was miserable. It was hot and humid, the rain was pouring non-stop, and we were afflicted with all kinds of skin lesion and foot fungus. Snakes, leeches, and scary insects were everywhere. All our stuff was covered with mildew, no matter how we were trying to keep things dry and clean. Not far from our camp were 3 villages where time had stopped. People were fishing and farming and went about life as if there was no war. We went from house to house in these little villages, looking for Viet Cong collaborators, and any sign that the villagers were supporting the North Vietnamese army, which had taken over the war. To get information, we roughed up some of the village leaders who were terrified of us. In every hut, people screamed with fear when we entered, and for that reason we despised them. We even shot their animals for fear that they would be booby-trapped. During these searches, we turned everything upside down to look for weapons, tunnels, anything that would give us reason to become really violent. We were thinking they were afraid of us because they had something to hide, and we thought about them as enemies and less than humans. Most of us were disappointed when we didn't find what we were looking for. That's how it was. Crazy Tim wanted to burn down all the villages, including men, women, and children. To him, none of them belonged to the human race. For some reason, I stopped him by using my status as an American hero. I guess he didn't want to be mentioned in some interview at the end of the war. He was clearly annoyed with me, interfering with his authority, but he didn't go ahead with his plan. Crazy Tim was a killer, always looking for ways to inflict pain and spill blood. One early morning, around 4, I woke up listening to voices that sounded strange to me. Some of the boys were whispering and swearing as they told each other stories about how they had put God's fear into the people in the nearest village. They were obviously pleased with something they had done. I got up to find out what the commotion was about, and to my surprise, I found 3 of the white kids dressed up like American Indians. They had cut the hair to mohawks, attached feathers that were hanging down on the back of the head. They were naked except for loincloth that was held in place with a broad belt. Their faces were covered with stripes of red paint to make them look scary. Each of them had a huge knife hanging from the belt, and each of them had tied scalps to the belt. The scalps were fresh, and blood was running down their legs. Some scalps were women's hair, and some of them were so small that they must have come from children. One of them whispered, "Kevin, you motherfucker, we did it, we fucking did it." Under the cover of the night, we sneaked into the village over there and went from house to house. We woke them up to their worst nightmare. 2 of us held down these sneaky little bastards, and the 3rd took the scalp, making sure that no screams were heard. We did it. We fucking took the scalps. Some of them were killed, some we let live. None of these monkeys will ever dare to threaten our lives again. We took care of it, and we had decided to do the other 2 villages during the next couple of nights. This is the way to pay back what these people are doing to us. This is how we should be running this war. We have some news for you, Kevin. You are coming with us tomorrow night. We want you to have some skin in this game so you can never tell anyone about this stuff, because nobody will ever understand. I was speechless, and I wanted to protest. Just as I was opening my mouth, I was surrounded, and one of them held his knife to my throat and promised to kill me if I was trying to get out of this situation. You either join us or we'll get you into an accident, and you will never get another medal or see your family and country again. They were serious, no doubt about that, and I was desperate to get off the hook. I went to see Crazy Tim and told him about what was going on, and he took a long look at me and said that he didn't hear what I just told him. The next evening, these 3 guys took me away from the camp, cut my hair, painted my face, and had me sharpen my bayonet until it was razor sharp. Again, I tried to talk myself out of the situation and promised never to tell anybody what they were doing if they would just let me go, and all I got back was just more scary threats. I joined them that night. They made me scalp 3 people alive, and something happened to me that will haunt me for the rest of my life. I started to take some kind of pleasure from scalping and killing. I became an animal, and I kept maiming and killing these poor people, and I didn't want to stop. It was like I was taken over by the devil, and I became his angel of death. I don't even remember how we came back to the camp, but I remember a fire. We danced around celebrating our victory over the enemy. When I woke up in the camp the next morning, it slowly dawned on me what I had done. How could I let myself fall so far down into hell? Carlos, you came up from the hole, but I never did, and I'm still there. The devil is lurking somewhere in my soul, and he doesn't allow me to forget him. He may be back again, and there is no telling what can happen. I am so scared. I have never said that out loud before. I'm sorry that I'm crying. But is there anyone who can take pity on me and forgive me? Just before the war was lost to the North Vietnamese, we were back on the plane to the United States. The soldiers on that plane were a sad bunch of twisted kids, many burdened by unspeakable secrets and occasional visits to hell. I returned to my town in South Carolina. Everybody wanted to shake my hand. People told me how proud they were of having their hero back in town. At the same time, people were spitting behind the returning Vietnamese vets, as if they were responsible for the shameful defeat of the invincible U.S. military. I retreated into my childhood room and just sat there drinking, smoking weed, and working up my rage. I tried to read some self-help books, but I just could not connect to any of that stuff I was reading, the words through my disgust for myself and everything around me. One day I snapped and destroyed the room, everything in it, including the windows and the door, just because I didn't know what else to do. The few times I ventured out, I got into fights with people. People I knew who had defended the war now denied that they had ever been in favor of the war. Fucking hypocrites and cowards. I started to hate them all, including my own family. The celebration of the hero turned to scorn, and people started to hate me back. My parents and the preacher got together and told me that I would find life better elsewhere. The fucking hypocrites told me that this would be for my own good, since life in town would no longer be safe for me. I stood up and told them that I was glad to leave them to rot in their stupid, narrow-minded lives, and I asked them all to go to hell. I left for New York City, hoping to disappear into the crowds. Since I came here, I've been holding on to a few temporary jobs. I met some vets, but everything ends badly. Now I'm drifting from soup kitchen to soup kitchen, panhandling, and sometimes stealing to get money to eat and get high. Mostly I sleep on the streets. This is what it all came to, and I'm giving up hope for a decent life. What kind of hell is waiting for me now? The one I am in torments me night and day. I can't even escape the punishment in my sleep. I'm sure that other kinds of hells are waiting for me. That is the reason why I'm afraid to take my own life. Right now, I feel strangely uplifted that I got this story off my chest. Somehow, I feel good telling you, and all I see right now is faces looking at me with kindness. That is a miracle. A miracle. Sergei. A slight figure with a pockmarked face, his eyes narrowly set, and a nose a bit too big for the rest of his face. He stands up and moves his chair closer to the table, as if to mark that the stage belongs to him. He speaks in a slow, deep voice, thick with a Russian accent. The tenor of his voice is surprisingly deep and seems unrelated to his body. My English is not the best, but I feel that I have understood Kevin's story. Kevin, I'm touched to hear what you just told us, and what you are going through. Back in the Soviet Union, I knew many young men who came back from the war in Afghanistan. Most of them were angry and had difficulty speaking about what they had seen and what they had done. That war is awful, and is still going on. Carlos, Russia has many children who are looking for their fathers, and your story moves me deeply. I wish your father could understand what awful thing he did to you. Joseph, you were running away from some scary people, and this is where I connect to you. In the Soviet Union, you would find scary people who operated above the law and could do whatever they wanted with you. Many of us were scared because a wrong word at the wrong time could have catastrophic consequences. All of us sitting around this table are homeless and on our own. So it seems to me that we have little to lose. My perception so far is that we have a good understanding why we have ended up here. From what I have heard so far, none of us is really crazy. We may have problems, but I think we can do something about our lives. Now let me tell you how it is that I am here now. I was an assistant professor in experimental psychology at Moscow State University, and my job was to run rats in a maze. The purpose was to understand how rats behaved with each other in overcrowded situations. The police and the army took an interest in what we were learning, and they used the result to prepare tactics for managing crowds in explosive social situations, things like that. Anyhow, I got an opportunity to teach at the university in Tashkent, the capital of Uzbekistan. The assignment was for a year, and I was ready for some adventure and a change of scenery. I packed a few things and said goodbye to my girlfriend and my family back in Moscow. The university in Tashkent gave me a small apartment on campus, a lab with 2 assistants, and a group of students. Most of them were there to stay out of being drafted into the Soviet military. Any boy enlisted in the university program was protected from the draft board. One of my lab assistants was a young and very beautiful girl named Nasir. She was clever, dedicated to the job, and she liked to flirt with me in spite of the fact that she came from a strict Muslim family. After a few months, I started to have sexual fantasies about her. I never told her about my girlfriend back in Moscow. We used to stay long hours to run our experiments, keeping the rats busy and analyze data sitting side by side. Nasir had explained to her family why she was coming late some nights, because of our workload. Well, and one evening it happened. We could no longer hold back our attraction for each other, and we ended up in my bed. Nasir was a virgin, and this was obviously an important moment in her life, as I was to find out. She started to talk about how happy she was to have found a good man like me, and she cried with joy, talking about all the beautiful children we were going to have together. She said that her father, whom I had met once, was going to be proud to have a son-in-law like myself. Nasir was already planning the wedding and described the food and the guests. I was stunned and didn't know what to say. It didn't even occur to me that this night was not just another one of my conquests. I told her how attractive she was and how fond I was of her. Marriage, however, was not on my mind right this moment. She started to cry and told me that her life was ruined and no man would ever look at her now. She talked about her virginity as the gift for me given from her heart. Was I going to dishonor her in front of her family and everybody in the world? She left in tears before I could talk some sense into her. The following day, Nasir didn't show up for work. On the 3rd day after she left, I was preparing to go to bed when I heard a strong knock on the door. Outside were Nasir's father and her 2 brothers, dressed in traditional Uzbek kaftans with gold ornaments and skull caps. They were armed with shotguns and curved knives stuck into the sashes. The father put his right hand over his heart and greeted me in a soft voice. He explained to me that my home was now going to be in Tashkent, and I was going to marry Nazia. I told him that I was going to be honest with him. Marriage was out of the question, no matter how much fondness I had for Nazia. The father continued in the same low voice and told me that he well understood what I was saying, but if that were to be my decision, the family would have to kill Nazia and me. These were the rules, and there was no other way. He was serious, and there was clearly no room for negotiations. The idea was for me to move in with some relatives while the family was making arrangements for the wedding ceremony. I was also told that I would have to convert to Islam. Arrangements had already been made for me to meet with the imam that very same day. I was given a short time to pack my things while the three of them were standing guard at my door. I was sitting on the bed, desperately trying to think my way out of this situation. As luck would have it, my small apartment was on the ground floor, so I quickly gathered a few things and escaped through the window. After arriving to the railway station, I bought a ticket and got on a train to Moscow. My life was saved, and I didn't have to spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder. I didn't worry about Nazia. It was all about me. Back in Moscow, I moved back with my girlfriend and again took up my job at Moscow State University. I kind of forgot about Tashkent and the mess with Nazia and her family. A few months after my return, one early morning, there was a big bang on the door, and I opened. Outside in the hallway were Nazia's father and his two sons, this time dressed in suits. Now the voice was a bit harder, and they were going to kidnap me, no question about that. My girlfriend came to the door to find out what the commotion was all about. Nazia's father explained that I was coming back with them to Tashkent to celebrate my wedding with his daughter. My girlfriend started to scream and told me that she hoped that she would never have to see me again. She asked them to wait and left the four of us in the hallway. After a few minutes she came back and threw all my things in front of my feet and closed the door. The brothers held on to my arms, walked me down the stairs. Once outside the building, I made a sudden break, and I ran for my life. Behind me, I could hear them trying to catch me, but I had the advantage of being on my turf, and I managed to escape. I went into hiding in the apartment of an old childhood friend who took pity on me. The police in Moscow had no time for me and simply laughed when I asked for their protection. I found a criminal man from the Caucasus who provided me with a passport under a false identity, a U.S. student visa, and a one-way ticket to New York. I sold everything I owned to pay this man for his services. I left everything back in the Soviet Union, my job, my family, and my belongings. Now I was an erotic refugee, and here I am, homeless on the streets in New York. I don't have any money, and I'm very hungry. I have a loose agreement with a Russian man in Brighton Beach who vaguely knows one of my Moscow friends. He has promised me to share this apartment for the next 5 months in exchange for taking care of his old parents and walk his dogs. The room is only available in a month from now, and until then I am on my own without any money in this unforgiving city. I am in a situation of extreme poverty and vulnerability in the richest country in the world. I know nobody, and I'm so tired of this country and the people here who seem to care only about themselves. What have I done to deserve this fate? Anyhow, let me tell you how relieved I feel to have the opportunity to talk and to listen to some honest and real people. Each one of you speaks to my heart, and you inspire me in so many ways. Sergei leans back on his chair and signals that he has finished his story. After a few moments of silence, I say, "David, you have been sitting here quietly. We are here telling each other some of our stories. Joseph runs for his life from Congo. Carla's heart is heavy with mourning and grief. Kevin has told us about his painful memories from the Vietnam War, and Sergei runs away from a life-threatening situation which brought him from the Soviet Union to New York City. Like you, David, everybody is homeless for the moment and has come to us to look for shelter, a chance to talk and perhaps inspire hope in each other. I know you a little, enough to ask you if you care to share your story with us. I hope you can feel that you're safe among all of us around this table. David starts to speak. Well, let me be frank and tell you that I'm not sure that I'm safe here. I have a master who tells me what to do, and I just hope he will not disapprove if I talk openly to you men. When he comes to visit me, he lets me know that I have no worth, and I am told that I become wild and aggressive. I was born here in the Bronx. I became a carpenter like my father. I did pretty well until I got drafted in the Korean War. I was in my early 30s. At the time, I saw a lot of action. The years I spent there changed my life. The whole thing was just one miserable experience of fear and cold. When the North Korean army was pushed back, the Chinese came to help them. UN forces were getting ready to pull back, and my company was ordered to delay Chinese infantry pouring in over the border. We built trenches on a hill in the middle of a valley where the enemy was expected to attack. We were told that we would be evacuated after we had held down the assault. All we had were light weapons, grenade launchers, flamethrowers, and a couple of field guns. We succeeded to pin down the Chinese infantry for 2 full days, off and on supported by artillery bombardment from behind us. Well, we ran out of ammunition, and the helicopters never came for us. The few of us that survived the 2-day battle were taken prisoners. I have some dreamlike memories from the years in the North Korean prison camp, and what I remember, I don't want to talk about. When I came back to the United States, I received a grant from the U.S. government, went to City University here in New York, where I studied philosophy and received a Ph.D. I became a bit of a star in the department, and I was offered a job as an assistant professor. One night I woke up from a loud voice asking me to wake up and pay attention. The voice told me to go to the streets of Manhattan, serving as a missionary of philosophy, teach people common sense, and give them tools to examine their ways of thinking. I was told that I could make the world into a better place if I could lead people to their human nature and help them with new ways of understanding themselves in a world full of confusion. I started to go around on the streets and public places in Manhattan with the purpose to engage people with these questions. Wherever I showed up, most people turned their backs on me and treated me as if I was a crazy person. The project seemed hopeless, but the voice told me to persevere and continue my mission no matter what obstacles came in my way. At this time, my friends in the department did not want to have anything to do with me, and I lost my job at the university. I drifted around, sharing my message of reason and freedom, and stopped taking care of myself. My mission to save people from their misery was the only thing that was important to me. The voice became both louder and stronger, and suddenly I was told that my mission was changing. Now I was to find absolute freedom for myself, and caring for others would no longer be necessary. I was to transcend any concern I had for rules and convention. I would have to train my mind to dissolve all habits and boundaries, and I started to look for the freedom that the voice promised me, but no matter how hard I tried, I became increasingly miserable and felt like a prisoner. The voice kept screaming at me that everything I did and think was wrong. He never gave me any help where to look. I argued with him, and I started to shout back. He refused to change his plan for me and continued to diminish me. The question that haunted me was how I could find freedom standing above the society and its limitations. I was on my own. Before coming here, I was living under the Williamsburg Bridge. It's been a cold winter, and the men and women were breaking up boxes and things found in containers. Big fires were lit inside oil barrels, and we were crawling into makeshift shelters near the fire made from cardboard boxes and old mattresses. People from the city came around to save us from the cold, but most of us refused to accept help to go to the shelters. Several of the homeless men and women were dying from the harsh conditions, and like most of us, I was ill. My feet had become swollen and so painful that I could hardly walk, and my old shoes no longer fit me. I realized that I was facing the end of my life. When I tried to get help from the others, it was clear that no one had any energy to care for anyone except fending for themselves. One day, an old man joined us under the bridge. He was at the end of his life, and nobody seemed to care what would happen to him. He was dressed in rags and was coughing violently, unable to move around. The things that caught my attention was that he was wearing some nice shoes that I thought would fit me. The voice gave me permission to take them from him and called me a coward if I hesitated. The man was dying, and I needed his shoes. That night, when nobody was looking, I took an old blanket, put it over his face. He made almost no movement in resisting me. After a few minutes, he made a low, guttural sound, and then it was over. He was dead, and the shoes were mine. The shoes fit me, and I could walk again, even if some of the pain was still there. My life was saved for the moment, but I did realize that another life was sacrificed for a pair of shoes. After a few days, the voice started to accuse me of murder, and I was shouting back that he had set me up to kill this man and had given me his permission. I became convinced that his betrayal would allow me to be free from the voice and all the demands. During a few weeks after this murder, the argument with the voice was taken to the streets, and I was shouting at him to stop following me around. The thought formed in my mind that I had to go to the police and turn myself in to receive the punishment for this crime. I went to the police precinct on the Lower East Side and told the officer what I had done. It was so hard to talk about the murder that I started to speak with a rapid voice, piling up arguments for my punishment in ways that was confusing even to me. The officer told me to stop babbling and asked me to leave him alone. He was holding his nose and told me the stench from me was unbearable. He gave me the address to one of the missions at the Bowery and advised me to go and get myself cleaned up. After that, I tried again to confess. This time, I approached 2 police officers on Delancey Street and told them about my crime. They ignored me and said that I was already punished enough. They even laughed at me and told me not to worry about it. I am so sorry for what I have done, and now I think that it would have been better to accept my destiny and die there and then under the bridge. I never told anybody about this act except the police, and I just want you all to believe me. Please tell me how I can save myself. The voice is still there, and he is my deadly enemy. It is amazing that I haven't had words from him while I have been telling my story, but now I'm thinking everybody is my enemy, including all of you in this room, and I feel like leaving. When he's finished telling his story, I let the silence speak, and then I say, David, please don't think of us in this room as your enemies. Look into the faces and you will see nothing but compassion. David, you're safe here. Please stay with us. Joseph is the first to speak. It's not so easy to make sense of all these stories since I'm only picking up fragments from each one of you. I do understand that all of us are finding ourselves in challenging circumstances. Do we all think that we are victims of unfortunate circumstances, or could we have made better choices when facing all these difficulties? In my case, the aircraft engine exploded, and that accident had nothing to do with me, or perhaps I really was careless. I escaped to what I thought would be a safe place here in the U.S., the land of freedom and happiness. If I really think about the whole situation, then the truth is that I chose the job as an avionics technician, and I made the decision to show up for work that day. Perhaps the police knew that I had been a critic of the political corruption that I saw around me. Maybe that was the reason why I was the first suspect. Under less dramatic circumstances back in Zaire, I would know what to do to get some help if I was in personal difficulties. I could always go to the Luba people, my tribe, and get some shelter and food. Since I'm a practicing Christian, the Luba church would help me to get me on my feet, much like this place is providing shelter for me now. It seems to me that all of us in this room are struggling with various kinds of ghosts that are occupying your hearts and minds, and each one suffers alone. None of us have a shelter, and life appears naked and raw in front of most of us. We all know that we must walk out through this door, and then what? It's hard to take responsibility for one's life when you feel that your life is worthless, and for some of you, life seems to have lost all value. When I was convinced that I was going to die, I had a visit from an evil ghost that told me that my life was over and to give it up, but the ghost is no longer with me. This shelter gives me a chance to look the ghost straight to the eyes, should he come back. I'll tell him to his ugly face that I have no fear of him. I own nothing right now, but I'm bringing skills and knowledge with me. Nobody can take that away. Now I just need to find places where people can make use of my knowledge. I have heard that many people here do not think that black people can do what I can do, so that may be something that I need to overcome. Carlos seems inspired by the moment and starts talking. Since I'm not very clear about all the forces that brought me on this difficult journey, I'm listening carefully to your stories. We seem to come from such different circumstances, but for some reason, we all ended up here around this table. What kind of choices did I have to make in my own life? If I go back to the different crossroads, what could I have done differently that would steer me to a normal life, whatever that is? Can I be honest and look at myself without the excuses that I know all too well? Why did I experience myself as a worthless person after I had lost my wife and child? Why was there no identity of me left to help me to find a life with dignity? Was the attachment to Carmen so strong that everybody else was left out of my life, including myself? How can I find my way out of this darkness? I am hoping to get some perspectives from you all, and hopefully I can be of some help in return. Joseph, you tell us that the knowledge you bring with you will open the doors to a decent life. Just now I remember that I am a pretty good plumber, and I am astounded how I have managed to forget about that. I've decided to trust you, since all of you have spoken from the place of honesty. I'm looking around the room at the symbols of suffering, sacrifice, compassion, and forgiveness. This room feels very sacred to me right now, and something wants to happen that can only be for the good. The dilemma for me is to accept what you, David, have done to the poor man with the shoes. I want to forgive you in my heart, but it was you, David, who murdered an innocent person, even if it was the voice who told you to kill this man for his shoes. When you describe your life, you present yourself as two people, one capable of reflecting on your actions, and the other one under the slavery of your voice, your master. How can anybody understand the forces pulling you in different directions? Who is the one guilty of murder? Sorry, but this is confusing to me, to my religion, and to my sense of justice. Life is so precious, and I'm thinking of Carmen and Maria and how the flame of their sacred lives was blown out for reasons I will never understand. Kevin decides to speak. If David is a murderer, then I too am a murderer. I shot civilian Vietnamese people, sometimes in the back when they tried to escape. I killed their animals for no reason. I murdered and maimed innocent people in gruesome ways. There are times when I'm telling myself that all that horror didn't happen, but the truth wins. Why would you accept me here after learning about what I have done? It's hard for me to really believe that you look at me with kindness, though kindness is what I see. I answered a call from the President of the United States to serve in this war when I was just too young to have any idea who I was. Do I have the right to make my bitterness into a mental fortress to hide in? Is this finger-pointing to a country that robbed me of my youth and a chance to have a decent life of no use? No matter how I try to escape, it's just too hard for me to live with this burden. How is my descent into hell a consequence of a society that has deceived me and refuses to apologize? I want an apology from the people who created the war and then forgot those of us who returned to what we thought would be home. The disinterest from the U.S. government was thinly covered with stupid programs and empty political speech. Why is it that my life has ended up on the garbage pile of this society? How can anyone live from hand to mouth on the streets and stay proud and decent? Mother Teresa and the sisters have denounced all possessions and have gained respect from the whole world. How come she and the sisters can build an empire built on compassion? And I don't even know how to begin because of the prison I have built for myself. Kevin finishes and becomes silent as he looks up to the ceiling as if he is looking for answers. I decide to continue. Until this moment, I have cast myself in the role of helping this conversation along. I hope I can make myself be known to you with the same honesty as I'm experiencing from listening to your stories. Everybody here can rightfully be called an outsider or a foreigner, a person who finds himself in unknown territory. All of you have been running away from difficult circumstances and made choices that brought misery to your lives. This is also true about me. One of the reasons that I am here is because I am looking for reasons to keep on living. I left my wife and 2 small children, my parents and most of my friends, to come to look for myself in New York City. I burnt most of the bridges behind me, and I see no way back. I'm alone and lonely, just like all of us here. I struggle with a relationship to myself, feeling of hopelessness often overwhelm me, but I don't think I will be able to live with myself if I give up on hope for a better future. There were reasons to break up from my life as I knew it, but the deepest reason was my numbness mixed with chaotic emotions. I was choking on my formless anxiety. Having come here a year ago, I still live in fear of losing my mind without anything to hold on to. I have this idea that I am hanging from a cliff on the tip of my fingers, afraid of letting go and not knowing how far I will fall. A few months ago, one late evening, near the hotel where I have been staying, I walked past an entrance to a house, and there, draped over a stairway, was a suit, shirt, tie, hat, and shoes. I was convinced that I had physically been in this suit and left. When I came back to the shabby hotel room, I looked in the mirror and I screamed. Who was I looking at? The screams were so loud that somebody called the police, thinking that someone was being murdered. The fear of losing my mind is real, even as I speak. I came to the mission with the hope of being of some use, but secretly I'm also here to confront the fear of losing my mind, with no hope to come back to anything at all. Here I would meet people who felt that they lost everything. Perhaps I could understand what brings people to desperate circumstances and to learn what to do and not to do. Listening to your stories, I'm suddenly meeting myself. I've come to understand how others look at their lives, and through your honesty, you're helping me to face myself in a way that's hard to put words to. I'm getting tired of listening to the different stories that I'm telling myself to explain my inner misery. The stories just don't sound right, but I don't know what else to lean on right now. The last thing I want to say is that I am hoping to get to a place where I can take 100% responsibility for my own life and the choices I have made. I long for a life that is joyful and confident. Do I have the courage to look pain straight in the eyes and not back off? I have enough resources to keep me floating for a near future, but soon I need to find a way to make a living. What that life will look like right now is hidden in the clouds. This is all I have to say for now. David continues after a short pause. The voice is not with me now, and I can talk straight from what I think is my own mind. I do agree that I need to confront the choices I have made. Is there redemption in fully accepting our situations? Should I be seeking the truth, or only search for the way that leads there? Can we let go and allow the hope for a better life to emerge right here and now? I'm Jewish, and I was born in a religious Orthodox family. As I'm looking at the picture of the Virgin Mary, lovingly caring for the dead body of Jesus, I must admit that I feel strangely excluded from God's atonement for mankind. Is it possible that the real cause of my misery relates to the fact that my people, the Jewish people, gave Jesus to the Romans to die in the most horrible way? The sisters have received me with open hearts, and I feel some kind of hope in the way they see me. Right now, I feel safe with you all. Carlos, I don't have a good answer to your doubts about me. How do I take responsibility when the voice deprives me of the will to resist what I'm being told to do? Truthfully, I know that I am entering some world that is not there, and yet it's real. The madness drives me mad, and I feel naked and defenseless. Sorry for being so blunt and emotional, but I don't know what else to say. I don't know who I am. Right this minute, I'm sure that you all want me dead, because it is obvious that I am in conversation with the devil. David looks down at the table while tears are running down his face and signals with his hand that he is unable to continue. Sergei clears his throat and speaks slowly. I need to reflect on what I hear about the choices we have made with serious consequences as a result. I went to Uzbekistan thinking that all in the Soviet Union was streamlined and uniformed. I could act in Tashkent the same way I was acting in Moscow. If I had taken the time to understand the Muslim culture, I could have been happily working at my university now, but instead I find myself as a bum on the streets of New York City. The virginity of Nazir was a bridge to relationships with other families, and with that link taken away, her family lost their rudder. My ignorance is the real reason for being here. I have this feeling that I raped Nasir, though we'd had consensual sex. Some of us have entered the stream of life without thinking ahead. Others anxiously plan and try to foresee all possible consequences of any action. Most of us are not equipped to respond to random and chaotic events, and when life shakes us, we tend to act as chicken without heads, and I, for one, need to become a person that is able to think before acting. So here I am in the country of free speech and the pursuit of individual freedom and happiness, and all I can think is that I have ended up in a solitary confinement in a gigantic open-air jail. I'm homesick, and I want to go back to Russia, get drunk, and complain about the misery of standing in stupid lines. Sergei laughs briefly to cover up his sadness, and then slowly shakes his head. And I decide to share what comes up in my mind. I would like to tell you some of the experiences I have when listening to your stories. I seem to have a gift to see others, but I have been told that I am not very good at seeing myself. I'm in a battle with my inner ghosts, and they almost never show their faces to me. Someone told me that people who are not satisfied with who they are the ones who are driven to greatness, but if that is true, the price for greatness is too much for me to pay. I hesitate to tell you what I suddenly saw because it is against my rational self. Listening to you this morning, a beautiful angel entered the room. I think that the angel has come as a sign of hope, and she's holding her wings over us. I'm not really religious like that, but I do see the angel, and I am amazed. Where do we go from here? Joseph says, before talking about where to go next, I want to agree with you, Lars. I feel the angel's presence, and she's come to help. I'm brought up as a Christian, so I have heard and read about angels all my life, and now an angel has come to visit. Let us honor her presence and let this moment be long and helpful. To sit here and feel safe after facing death in this city is something I want to behold. When fear has no room, freedom fills the void. I can say that I don't want this moment to stop now. David says, yes, the angel is moving in the spaces between us, and I hope that she will use her divine power to conquer the evil voice and my impulse to run away from this room. I am so torn inside, and the truth is that I must use every ounce of willpower to stay here with you. I do not want to stay, but I must. Sergei stands up and says, I'm sad to say that I see no angel here. We don't have them in the Soviet Union, so that may be why she is not visible to me. But if the angel is the magic of a group of people who tell their stories with their truth and accepting each other with open hearts, then I too see the angel. For me, there is no divine force, but I hope that we will have the willpower to step out of the hard conditions that we have helped life to create. Now I'm feeling some irrational glimmer of hope for change. I don't deserve to be a drifter in New York City. I have no idea what will happen next, but the sense of connection with you all has some mysterious energy that I would like to understand more about. Kevin says, I will always remember this place and this moment where I told you my secret that has been buried under a lid of guilt and shame. The experience of being here means a lot, and I'm watching you all with amazement. No one of you here has turned your back to me. I have not fallen further into hell by revealing this cruel story about me. Today I started to climb a ladder with no end in sight, but I am climbing. I will not go back to my hometown to be forgiven, nor do I want to be with people who say that they have found the only truth and condemning everybody else to hell. I don't know where the ladder leads, but for sure, if I continue to steal for drugs and alcohol, the climb will be unsafe, and I need to be strong right now. Carlos jumps in at this point and says, "In my country, angels are everywhere, and we even give boys and girls names after angels, so I have no problem to see the angel in this room. She came here because we invited her here. She carries a sword, which she will use against our demons. That is her promise if we help her. My religious upbringing lets me know this, and for that I'm grateful. Even after we all part and go our ways, I want to keep this angel at my side to watch over me. I just need to find out what I have to do for her to stay with me." As the session draws to an end, I decide to make some kind of summary of what has been said around the table this morning. I think that all of us here, including myself, are looking to deepen our understanding of choices we've made. Have I allowed guilt and shame to take the place of purpose and playfulness? It is true that many of us have put our own sense of right and wrong to the side and done things most people have come to think of as a derailment from a civilized life. Sometimes I try to imagine how I would experience my life when I have come to peace with myself. Clearly, I do need to take responsibility for my situation and stop myself when I shake my fist at the heavens. I must have the courage to simply look straight at myself, and I'm not sure that I have ever done that or that I even know how to do that. For you, Carlos, I am moved by how you describe your journey to some very dark places. Your openness is a big step forward, and your decision to change things seems genuine to me. You tell us that you let the bottle confuse your mind, and you even forgot that you have a profession. Now perhaps you can think of yourself as a good plumber and give up the bottle. Maybe you can find people to support your decision to start a new life and increase the devotion to something beyond yourself. I'm not the one to guide you here, but if you want, I will make an appointment with one of the sisters I know, and perhaps she can be with you for a while. She's a genuine person, always willing to help. All I know is that change is both difficult and possible, but I am sure that faith in religion or anything larger than yourself brings up thoughts that the ordinary mind cannot perceive. With the motivation that you are expressing, there is only one way, and that's up. Perhaps you can start here in this building to do some needed plumbing improvements. For you, Sergei, perhaps there is a way to come back to your academic job. Why not talk to the people at the New York City University, if you can somehow get your Russian academic credentials sent over here? David, I have met some Franciscan friars, lovingly called the Johns, who run a hotel for homeless people downtown Manhattan. I happen to know them a bit. They treat people with dignity and provide a good life for folks in need. To pay the rent in the hotel, you must allow the government to give you the pension you have the right to receive as a war veteran. We can help you with the paperwork, and there is no reason for you to be afraid of the government. For you, Joseph, my friend Jane knows some Dominican friars in Lower Manhattan who need some upgrade of their building, and perhaps we can connect you to them and see if we can find a job for you. No promise, but we can try. Kevin, you need to find yourself, and perhaps you need some more help to come out of what you describe as hell. Why not speak to the sisters and learn to look at yourself as an individual who deserves love? These nuns know a lot about both heaven and hell, and I'm sure that they will find a way to support you so you can contact the Veteran Administration here in New York. Tomorrow morning, I invite some of the sisters. I will summarize your stories, and we can listen to what they have to say to us. No one can force any religion or ideology on any of us, but I think their experience can help us deepen our perspectives of a possible future. Let us stop here and decide to meet tomorrow morning for a continuation of our conversation. I think we need some time to reflect and absorb what has happened here this morning to all of us. Thank you.